kind of getting to the front of the line and also having a license in hand and experience can definitely be the difference between, getting an interview and not getting an interview. And in my case, I had an apartment, I had a dog. I was like, what am I going to do with all my stuff? And so I actually ended up putting everything in storage and just kind of went on the road. I downsized into 2 suitcases and really moved from Georgia, where I was at my initial position, to my first travel contract out in the central coast of California. So a cross-country move, 2 suitcases, and here I am working at an acute care facility for my first contract.
Hi, I'm Kim Tolson, and I'm the traveling therapist. It's my passion to teach therapists how to navigate online private practices and multiple income streams so they can travel the world. I'm a digital nomad with a virtual insurance-based private therapy practice and a multi-six-figure coaching business. I'm obsessed with entrepreneurship and developing tools that can help therapists live an adventurous lifestyle. In this podcast, I will discuss my journey as a digital nomad. I'll chat with other traveling therapists and help you navigate the complexities of running an online insurance-based practice. I'm so glad to have you with me on this journey. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Traveling Therapist Podcast. I'm so excited today to have Alisha Powell here with us. She's amazing. So I'm so excited to hear about her journey and everything she's done. And Alisha, I'd really love to just turn it over to you and just ask you outright the question I ask everybody in the beginning is, how did you go from being just your typical therapist to a traveling therapist?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you so much, Kim, for having me. I think that my motivation to be a traveling therapist really came from my love for travel. I've had a chance to travel extensively through Europe and some other parts of the world. And I really wanted something that combined my love with travel for the work that I do as a social worker. And so I was working kind of a cubicle job, had a managed care company, and I decided that it really wasn't for me. And so that was really kind of the motivation that prompted me to start searching and looking for different areas of the field where I could utilize my skills in a way that really incorporated travel. So I actually kind of accidentally ran across travel social work. I was familiar with travel nursing, having some family members who were in the healthcare field, but I was curious to know if there was a component that was applicable for me as a social worker. And I really just stumbled onto just travel social work. I was looking online and kind of did several searches through some of the major job search engines and just accidentally one day searched travel social work, and all these positions popped up, and I was sold after reading some of the job descriptions and seeing what it was all about.
Wow, I love that. Before we hit record, I was telling Alisha, like, I've never even looked at that aspect of it as the traveling therapist perspective. I've always just looked at it like, have your own private practice, travel, take your practice with you. But this is a whole different aspect. So I would love if we could just talk about, like, what is a travel social worker? What type of jobs are there out there for people? How do you said online directories, but like, where do you go to find these jobs? And I'd also like to talk about, how do you think it's better to do it this way? Do you think it's better to do it with your own private practice, like pros and cons, maybe? That would be amazing. And I know that's a lot to throw at you at once.
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, when it comes to just getting started as a travel social worker, it really is contract work when we think about it. So I guess the main gist of it is that you get a chance to work at different facilities, usually throughout the United States, but there are also some international opportunities that come along as a travel social worker, where you work at, usually it's healthcare environments. So we're talking about hospitals, long-term care facilities, acute rehab facilities, but there's also opportunities that are in schools, working as school social workers or school counselors, and also working in correctional facilities. So those three settings tend to be some of the most popular things or settings that travel social workers work in. The most popular does tend to be healthcare. So usually it's working in different hospitals that have some type of mental health or behavioral health services employment need. And so a travel social worker comes in to really fill the gap. If somebody has to go on maternity leave, or they have a lot of employees that have sought other opportunities at the same time, that means that the hospital does need to be staffed. And a lot of times they'll bring in contractors or travelers to fit their employment needs for short-term contracts. And those can range anywhere from, I've seen things as short as 2 weeks to contracts as long as 52 weeks. And however, the average tends to be about 13 weeks, where most people start a contract and finish 13 weeks later. And typically at the end of that 13 weeks or whatever the end of the contract is, they get a chance to renew if it's a good fit with them in the facility, or they may choose to take another contract. So it's a lot of personal preference when it comes to deciding where you want to work, but also how long you want to stay in that specific setting and if you want to do something different.
Wow, that is so interesting to me. So just to recap, you said schools, hospitals, and what was the other?
Correctional facilities, so
Correctional
any types
facilities.
of
Wow.
prisons or wherever there's incarcerated individuals, those there tends to be a need for social workers in those settings too.
Wow. Oh my gosh. What is your specific niche? Have you done all of those, or is there one that you prefer over the others?
So my specific niche has really been in medical social work. I've worked a
Okay.
lot in hospitals. And so I got a chance to work in several different hospitals in 5 different states, which means that I got a chance to accrue a lot of clinical licenses as a kind of response to that, because
Oh,
licensure is also related to this process too, when it comes to being
interesting.
licensed in the state of the facility that you're working in. So that means that as social workers, I know that other mental health disciplines have also different state requirements for licensure. And so it can get kind of complicated when it comes to getting various states for licensure and making sure that your license is active before you start the contract. Sometimes it can kind of be a timing game. So it really depends on the
Ah.
setting of the facility, but that also means that most likely the facility does require you to get licensed, even at the master's level in that state that you're going to be working in.
Wow. So you would find something on the directory and maybe you would be looking for, okay, like I'm licensed in these 5 states, so I want to keep it to these states. And then, or if there's like, oh my gosh, there's one in Oregon. I've always wanted to live in Oregon. Let me check out the licensing process and see if I can get that real quick before I apply for this job. Is that how somebody would navigate something like that? Or
Yeah, it really kind of depends on the job and also what the job requirements are. In my experience, it's really been depending on what state person's licensed in. So for instance, in the jobs that I worked in California, they didn't require a license. The LCSW
oh,
requirements for California are a little bit different than some of the other states. And so a lot of the jobs that I worked in California did not require a license. I just needed my MSW. So I didn't have to go through all the paperwork and the applications that come along with licensure. But some of the other contracts that I worked did require a license. So I've worked in DC and I got a DC license just kind of ahead of time. So I would have it in hand. There are staffing agencies that will reimburse clinicians for the cost of licensure and assist with the application process. Personally, I found that a lot of times people aren't as familiar with any type of social science disciplines license. So sometimes it's easier just to do it myself and
oh,
to
interesting.
have it in hand already, because they do work on hand in hand with nurses as well. And the process for nurses and licenses are a little bit different than it is for social workers or other social science professions.
Wow, that is so interesting. So, what's the general like lead time, like average lead time to get a license in a new state, have you found?
Every state is a little bit different. Personally,
Sure.
I found that some of the states that are the larger states sometimes take longer because there's more people applying for licensure. A lot has to
Mm.
do with that specific state board of social work. If they're backed up, if they have a lot of applicants, kind of a lot of people are trying to get licensed. Sometimes it can be as short as 2 weeks. However, I've also seen it be as long as 7 to 8 months, depending on
Wow.
the state and what their guidelines are and how many applicants they have applying for licensure in the state.
Wow. Gosh, that is so interesting to me. So, okay, you'll find a job and it's, in a hospital setting that you're used to, it's in a state you're licensed in. What is the process then for you like? Is it, do you pack up everything? Are you already nomadic to begin with? I'm so curious about like your process. Like, how do you move on to the next job? And then what's it like to, go to a new hospital? Maybe I don't know if it's different specialties like intensive care or different, I don't even know. I don't even know how all that works, but I'm just curious, like, what does that process look like for you?
Yeah. So the process tends to be after you apply for a job, you're connected to a recruiter, which is somebody who really who really kind of connects you to these opportunities. So there's a staffing agency and you have a recruiter that their job is really to advocate for you and to find a position that's the best fit for your needs. So you may share, hey, I want to go to this state. I want to work at this facility. Hey, there's something here or there's something that's coming up. I was really, really fortunate to be connected to a recruiter who actually let me know before positions were posted that something was coming up. So I had a
Oh,
chance to apply before it even got into some of the listservs and some of the job search engines. So I kind of got a chance to kind of go to the front of the line when it came to applications. And so having a good recruiter really is crucial when it comes to being able to get connected to these jobs, because the travel social work environment has gotten more and more competitive, especially
oh,
as it's become more popular in nature. So kind of getting to the front of the line and also having a license in hand and experience can definitely be the difference between, getting an interview and not getting an interview. And in my case, I had an apartment, I had a dog. I was like, what am I going to do with all my stuff? And so I actually ended up putting everything in storage and just kind of
wow.
went on the road. I downsized into 2 suitcases and really moved from Georgia, where I was at my initial position, to my first travel contract out in the Central Coast of California. So a cross country move, two
Wow.
suitcases, and here I am working at an acute care facility for my first contract.
Oh my gosh. Could you take your dog?
I didn't take my dog, but
Okay.
however, most facilities, most staffing facilities also provide or give you the option of providing housing. And there are pet
Oh,
friendly housing where they actually give you a furnished apartment that comes as part of your contract. So people do bring their children, they do bring their pets. Sometimes they bring their spouses or partners as well with them for the length of the
wow.
contract. So housing does tend to be provided depending on the specifics of your contract. So they'll pay for that and a rental car and a flight to the location.
Wow, that is awesome. Does it include medical benefits? Can you get
It does
medical?
include medical benefits. So you are considered an
Wow.
employee of the staffing company. And so you get the medical benefits that they have available as a member of of the staffing company. And those
Wow.
can vary from, 401ks to health insurance to all the benefits that you would have at a traditional kind of 9 to 5 job. And if you do stay with that agency and continue to take contracts through that agency, your health insurance does continue. So there is the opportunity to get some continuity of care when it comes to benefits and health insurance and family, getting your family covered if you stay within that same staffing agency. So it makes it fairly easy to navigate because you still keep the same insurance benefits as you go from different contracts to different contracts.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing. That is really awesome. Yeah. So when you're doing this personally, do you take all the benefits or have you found it's better just to take the job and maybe get your own housing? I mean, it sounds like the package deal is probably the best way to
Yeah.
go, but I'm just curious how you navigate that.
So everybody else is different. I found initially that was helpful to have the agency provide some housing for me, especially my first contract. I didn't know the area. I was moving to somewhere I had never been before,
Oh,
and I
right.
had no idea what it looked like as far as housing. So for my first contract, I did have the facility provide housing, but I did decide to extend that contract, and I was able to find my own kind of in the midst of already being there on site. And so a lot of times when it comes to contracts, you're given the opportunity to either say, yes, I want housing, or no, I don't want housing, but I'll take the housing stipend that you provide. Because the great thing
Wow.
is that the staffing
Oh,
agency also provides you with a weekly housing stipend that you can use for housing if you decide not to take their housing that they provide. So that gives you a
wow.
bit more options and some flexibility with where you want to live if you don't necessarily want to go through like their housing department. So there's lots of different options. Personally, I found that if I'm going to a major city, a lot of times it's easier to find my own housing, using like Airbnb, Furnished Finance, or some of the other more popular short-term rental companies. But
Mhm.
if it's in an area that tends to be more rural, where there's not as many travelers, sometimes it's just easier and less of a hassle to have them provide that housing for me.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, this sounds like a really good deal. How long have you been doing it? I meant to ask you that in the beginning. How long have you been traveling
So I
around?
first got introduced to it in 2016. So I've been doing it since then. Right now, I'm fully remote. My last contract was in Washington, D.C. And so since I did relocate from the Maryland area to Houston, Texas area, I'm kind of in between contracts right now. But I've been doing it since then. And so it's been a really great way to expand my skill set and see how social work works in different parts of the country, but also have the flexibility of taking months off in between contracts when I have other things going on in my life and being able to have that flexibility and some of that freedom back.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. So do you still have a storage unit or have you downsized from that
I
or
have downsized. I still have the storage unit, but now I'm a little bit more settled. So I have more an apartment and I have like furniture and things like that. So when I do go
Oh,
back on the road, I'll still keep my stuff kind of stationary in one place now.
oh, okay. So you have like a home base, like right now
Yes.
that you go back to. Oh, I see. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Do you like having that home base to go back to, or did you?
I do. While I really enjoyed the whole experience of kind of living out of suitcases, I found that for me, it wasn't the most ideal. While I love traveling, it's also nice to have like a home to go back to or a little or space that really you can call your own. And so that's something that I did miss as an aspect of traveling social work when I was fully remote and kind of fully nomadic. Having that home base is something that I found is really important for me for self-care, kind of having a space to go back to and to come home to.
Yeah, I see. So do you rent out your space while you're gone, or do you, or is it just you just keep it as is and then you can just come back home when you're ready, like
I
that kind of thing?
yeah, I don't rent my space out when I'm gone. I usually fly back to visit, usually like once a
Oh,
month or so, and then at the end of the contract, then I'm home for several months at a time. However, there are travelers that do rent out their homes to other travelers or other people as they're on the road and working as travel social workers. So everybody's situation is a little bit different. I do have colleagues that have made money by kind of putting their homes on Airbnb and renting it out while they've gone on a 13-week contract. And that's something that's been an extra source of income while they're also on the road making income as well. And it's been, for a lot of people, really helpful financially when it comes to really paying down or meeting some of the financial goals that they have.
Yeah, I would think that'd be kind of a win-win. If you knew you'd be gone for like
Yeah.
6 months, a year or something, you could rent it out. And yeah, wow, that's so interesting. So I'm trying to think, I've got a million questions. So have you found like a sweet spot? Like how long of a contract is like really good for you? I would think a 2-week contract. I don't know. Is that a good thing? Is that like too short of a time? I'm just curious, like, where's the sweet spot with how long a contract should be for you?
Yeah. That's a great question. I know that for me, I would say 13 weeks has really been ideal because that tends to be the typical length of a contract.
Oh, no.
I did do a contract where it was 26 weeks and I ended up extending past that 26 weeks, which ended up being 6 months. And I stayed at the same facility for almost 8 months on a travel contract. And so
Wow.
a lot of times there's an opportunity to extend, especially because you're meeting an employment need. And many times they haven't filled the position yet. So depending on the staffing agency and also depending on the needs of the facility that you're working with, there's usually an opportunity to extend the contract for whether it's 2 weeks, another 13 weeks, or however long you want to extend it for. Typically, they feel that you're a good fit for the facility. There's an invitation given for you to extend. So I've gotten the chance to extend several times on some of the travel contracts that I've worked.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, so you can decide if you like it, and usually they have plenty of openings, so
Yeah.
they'll want to retain you since you're already trained, I guess,
Mhm.
and it's a lot easier to keep somebody. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so do you have like a medical specialty niche that the recruiters try to put you in? Like, is there always a certain department you want to work in a hospital, or are you able to kind of float and pick different areas if you want to expand your skill set, I guess? I'm just curious about that. Yeah.
So my experience in healthcare has been really varied. I have a lot of experience working in behavioral health hospitals, but also in med surg
Oh,
hospitals. So because of my experience, I can be pretty flexible when it comes to deciding what type of hospital I want to work in and what type of department. As a travel social worker, you don't always have like a say over what department you get assigned to because you're there to fill a
oh,
staffing need. So a lot of times they already know, hey, you're going to be in this department because we're trying to fill a staffing need or our social worker quit recently. And so we need someone to fulfill the duties of this position. So there's not always as much say so when it comes to this is my preference. This is where I'd rather be. A lot of times it's more of this is where we need you to be because you're here to fill a staffing need. And that means that travel social workers can float between units in a hospital. That means that they can oversee like an ICU or a neuro
oh.
ICU. It really depends on where they need you. And so it really is important to have a varied skill set and really be familiar with some of the many EHRs which the hospital uses because
Mm.
since you are a traveler, the orientation time is really cut in half. There's been times where
Wow.
I've started a contract day one. I kind of did like shadowing orientation day one, day two, I'm on the floor seeing patients and really getting to work.
Wow.
So it's so important to have some healthcare experience, especially when working as a travel social worker, because you're there to work, honestly, and they don't have as much time to invest in the orientation process and letting
Hmm.
you know, where's the bathroom and all the places that you need to know when you're coming into a new space. So there's a lot of thinking
Yeah.
on your feet, but also figuring it out as you go. And so having experience in healthcare is super crucial when it comes to being more marketable, but also feeling more comfortable in an unfamiliar territory.
Hi everyone, I'm Aaron Podratz.
And I'm Nathan Hawkins. If you don't know us yet, we are the voices behind the Shrink Think podcast, which is part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts.
We are so proud to be a part of this network, along with the Traveling Therapist podcast with Kim Tolson, and the great work she's doing to help people in their journeys.
And if you haven't discovered the Shrink Think podcast, you can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts. We love for you to join us as we seek to help you with your relationships, your healthcare practices, and your therapy journey.
Join us as we bridge the gap between clients and therapists. And be sure to check us out at shrinkthink.com/podcast and take our free e-course.
And have a great day.
Yeah, I was thinking that it must be, I mean, especially for somebody that's new to this, it must be sort of jarring to just get dropped into a hospital.
Yeah.
And I don't know how anything works and need orientation, but I'm like you said, I was thinking they probably don't want to give you too much of an orientation because they just want you in there, like filling that position pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Wow. So interesting. Yeah. So have you ever done the prisons or the school systems, or has it always been the hospital that you've kind of stuck to?
Yeah, so for me, it's always been the hospitals. I do have some colleagues that have done contracts at correctional facilities and schools across the country. So it really depends on your personal preference. With
Yeah.
healthcare, they really important to have at least 2 years of postmaster's experience. And a lot of times the staffing companies won't take you on as an employee or really recruit or advocate for you if you don't have those 2 years of postmaster's experience, just because the facilities are looking for somebody who can kind of get straight to work and they don't necessarily have the time and resources to invest in training you in all the ins and outs that come along with medical social work.
Mm. Wow. So interesting. Yeah. So how does somebody find a recruit, like a good recruiter? Because you said that's sort of crucial in this process, having somebody that, knows you, your skill set, can kind of help you, skip the application line if you need that. So how do you locate a good recruiter? Like, what's that process like?
So for me, I've found that a lot of times it's easier to find the job and then find the recruiter after finding the position.
Oh, yeah.
And so if I'm looking online for and looking at job postings, if I see a job that stands out to me, I'll apply for the job. A lot of times recruiters are assigned kind of randomly. So
Mhm. Mm.
sometimes it's a matter of luck when it comes to getting a good recruiter, especially since recruiters do tend to work more with other healthcare professions like nurses. And so they may not necessarily be familiar with all the ins and outs of social workers and how the licensure process works. And so a lot of it does come down to just kind of being able to advocate for yourself, kind of state what you're looking for and share that as clearly as possible, because their goal is to get you into a position, but they may not necessarily know all the questions to ask. And so as a social worker, I found that it's most important to ask the questions of the facility when I have the interview, because they'll know the ins and outs of the position and what that looks like. Many times recruiters are really just tasked with putting people in positions, but they don't necessarily know the ins and outs of what the position entails and all the duties and responsibilities that I would be doing as in that role. So asking the job specifically, hey, what will I be doing in this role? Give me more insight into if it's a good fit for me or not. Instead of asking the recruiter may not necessarily know all the ins and outs. It's always easier to kind of just go straight to the source and find out from the hospital, what are you looking for a social worker to do at your facility?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so interesting. So where do you go to find the jobs? Are there certain directories? Like I think of Indeed and, all these places online. Is that where you go to find these, or is there a specific directory for these types of jobs that people would want to find?
So there's several different ways to go around it. Personally, I found that Indeed has been helpful for me in just kind of getting like a lay of the land and knowing what's out there. But when it comes to looking for very specific positions, I usually go to the websites of the staffing agencies. And so there
Ah,
are some major ones that work specifically with social workers, and those do include such ones like there's one called Anders Group, one called
oh,
Med Travelers, one called Club Staffing, and some other ones in there where I found that these are some of the big companies that really have some experience working with social workers. There are some smaller boutique staffing agencies, and they have kind of their pros and cons as well. But I found personally that some of the bigger staffing agencies have a bit more resources, and they also offer a lot of times CEU reimbursement when it comes to getting the
ah,
CEU needed to renew your license. So there's some nice perks to come along with sometimes some of the bigger companies because they have more resources, and they also have a dedicated travel side where they actually book your flights, book your rental car, and you just kind
wow.
of walk up and once you land at the airport and go from there. So it
Oh
makes
my
things a lot
gosh.
more seamless.
That is so cool. Oh my gosh. So, okay, so they have great packages with the residence and the car and booking and the traveling and all that stuff. I'm just curious, you don't have to get into specifics, but like salary wise, how does it compare to somebody that might be just doing their own private practice versus, maybe somebody working in agency or for a group practice? I'm just curious, like salary range for something like this.
Yeah. So the salary range definitely varies because you're working in different states with different agencies that have different
Mm.
pay grades. And as we know, there's really no set like kind of standards across the United States for mental health conditions or travel social workers. I've found that overall, because you are paid on a weekly basis, it does make it easy to really pay down some debts and also meet financial goals because there is the aspect of getting paid weekly, which is something that doesn't always happen when you're in private practice, when you're waiting on insurance reimbursement. Sometimes it
Yeah.
doesn't always happen as in a timely manner as you'd like. And so I really like the timely matter of getting paid. And so I would say range wise, a lot depends on if you're getting the travel stipend or if the staffing agency is providing housing. But to give numbers, I would say anywhere between probably 700 a week to 4,000 a week. And so it really
Okay.
can vary depending on the state that you're in and the specifics of your contract.
Yeah. And that's factoring in like the stipends and all of the extra stuff that you get with it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And
Gotcha.
the way it typically works with stipends is that you get a stipend for food on a weekly basis. You also get a stipend for housing if you
Wow.
don't go with the agency's option for housing, but you also get an hourly rate as well. So there's an hourly rate, there's basically incidentals per diem rate for food incidentals that's coming weekly, and then also
Wow.
the housing stipend. So those three things together make up your hourly rate. And so
Oh, I
depending
see.
on the rates on each one of those specific things and the tax rates, because the per diem isn't taxed and your
Mm.
hourly rate is taxed, that also depends on what you take home on a weekly basis.
Wow. So interesting. So I guess you have to have a pretty good accountant too if you're if you're
Yes,
working in
it's
different
crucial
states.
to have a good accountant, especially when we're working in different states and
Yeah.
you're getting W-2s from different states, especially in the
Yeah.
period of a year.
Wow, that's so interesting. So before we hit record, you also mentioned that on top of this, you have your own private practice that you do, just like on the back end. So I'm just curious, like how many clients do you keep? Do you kind of turn it on and off depending on if you're on a contract or not? I'm just curious how you negotiate that piece of it.
Yeah. So for me, I found that private practice has been a kind of a great way to supplement income. I've kept it throughout my travel social work career. Mostly I work in the evenings. I'm seeing my private practice clients. So if I'm doing a day shift, let's say a 7 to 3, I'll start seeing clients around 5, 6, or 7 in the evening. So that's given me a chance to
Oh,
really kind of keep the same caseload, but also increase it in between contracts. And then I'll scale back a little bit, depending on, what the needs of the next contract are. So there's a lot of flexibility that comes along with that. I also teach social work classes online. So that gives me an
wow.
additional source of income, but also getting a chance to kind of expand my skills in the classroom and really combine my love of learning with being able to facilitate really important conversations for social work students that are really just coming up and learning more about the profession. So I get a chance to kind of combine a lot of my different interests at the same time.
I love that. So you're like a multifaceted entrepreneur.
Yeah,
And on top of all that, you wrote a book
I
about
did.
this,
Yeah.
right? Could you
Yeah.
tell us the name of the book and what the book's about and, just let everybody know how they can find it?
Yeah. So I started getting a lot of questions about like being a travel social worker and what my experiences were. And so I wrote a short ebook. It's available on Amazon called How to Be a Travel Social Worker. And in that book, I really kind of outlined some things to keep in mind, especially for people that are just getting started out. There's so many nuances when it comes to being able to negotiate a contract, to kind of read the fine print and decide, what are the most things that you want to advocate for in that setting. So I really kind of wrote a how-to guide and really shared some of the things that I've learned along the way that's made my life a little bit easier when it comes to advocating for myself, but also finding contracts that fit my needs and also continuing to get contracts because that's part of the job in that it can sometimes be kind of not stable because you're working on a contract basis. And so there
Yeah.
may be times where a facility does hire you for a job and then kind of says last minute, nope, we're sorry, we can't take you on for this contract. So it's important to have like a cushion of sorts because it's not always as predictable as a typical 9 to 5 job because you are on a contract basis and you're there because of an employment need, which can vary and can really go up and down depending on the facility and depending on what's happening there. So it's not always the
Yeah,
most stable.
I bet. Yeah. Well, anybody listening that wants to be a travel social worker, go check out that book. I'm sure it's like chock full of like little hints and tips and tricks and ways to navigate this.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I've got a lot of great feedback about the book, and I definitely encourage anybody to check it out. I also have a social media group on Facebook called
Oh,
Social Work Travelers, where people
oh,
can kind of
really?
come and just join and find out more about travel social work. We also have some people that post some job opportunities, and it's really a great resource for people that are really looking to find out more about what it looks like and also figuring out how this may fit into their life plans or their life goals.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna have to go join that right after we get off of this. I might already be in it. I don't know, but that's great. That's amazing. So just total side note, what was it like writing a book? Like what was the process? Because I'm also many of the listeners are like serial entrepreneurs, like we all have multiple income streams and that sort of thing. So I'm just curious, what was that like for you writing a book?
So for me, I think my process was a little bit different because I've had the experience of writing a dissertation, having a PhD
Oh,
in
yes.
psychology. So writing a book wasn't necessarily like the hardest thing because I have a lot of writing experience from the 120 pages that I put into this big
Oh
research
gosh.
project. So the writing stuff was fine. For me, it was really just being consistent with writing. And I think that's something that a lot of times writers or even people that don't write for a living sometimes fall into, is just kind of getting writer's block and really feeling to write consistently. So what I did is I kind of split up I kind of did an outline and then kind of gave myself 30 days to kind of write it out and to fill in that outline within that 30 days. And so I gave myself a word limit for how many words I wanted to write per day, and was able to stick to that to really kind of break it into manageable pieces. So it didn't feel like as daunting as writing an entire book. I just kind of wrote a certain amount of words per day and then brought it all together at the end.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. So how long did it take to write the book? I'm just curious.
So it took me a little bit over 4 weeks because
Oh,
I was doing
wow.
some other things because I have a lot of other competing priorities. So it wasn't something that got my full attention. If I had sat down and just like wrote it out 10 hours straight, it probably could have been done a lot sooner, honestly. But I had some other things going on. So I was able to write kind of in the blocks of time that I had. So it took about 3 or 4 weeks to get it all done to a
Wow.
point where I was like, all right, this is good. I like what I've written. I'm ready to publish.
That's amazing. Yeah. And then did you self-publish or do you go through a publisher? I'm just always curious about how that works.
Yeah. So I self-published and went through Amazon KDP. So it's available on Amazon in the ebook form. And so that was the quickest way that worked for me. But a lot of times authors will really weigh their options. There's some great resources out there when it comes to self-publishing, especially YouTube is a great resource when it comes to finding out more about the process of self-publishing. If you don't want to go through Amazon, there's a lot of different companies out there that you can sell your book to and who will really do that marketing for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting. We could probably have a whole podcast just on that process, I'm sure. That's amazing. You wrote it in four weeks. That's incredible. Oh my gosh. That is amazing. So are there any cons to this that you can think of? Like if somebody wanted to jump in, or we talked about a lot of the pros, are there cons that you found or things that you might caution people against if they're going to try to get into this?
I don't know if there's any specific cons because a lot of times it depends on where people are in their life, the most important thing. I will say that jobs like this are a little bit harder if you have like little children because
Oh,
if you're traveling on the road, you're, working 13 weeks at a time. If you have a school age child or older children, that up and down and moving to different locations may not always be the most feasible, especially when it comes to school and enrollment and childcare and daycare. It can present kind of an additional challenge. So a lot of the travel social workers that I've come across are either partnered or they don't have children, because that does kind of have an additional component and an additional thing to consider. So it can be more challenging to take your children on the road with you, as you can imagine, if you're not
Mhm.
homeschooling or, they need, if they're in school. That would be the only thing I would say that may be a con, because there are additional things to consider with families and partners and all of that stuff when it comes to traveling.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I bet that'd be super difficult to do. Do you have like a social community like in these places? Is it hard to find people to do things with, or do you feel like you just kind of fall into these places, you meet people, you go out to dinner, maybe, that sort of thing? I'm just curious about the social aspect of it for you.
Yeah, I've been super fortunate to have some really great connections that have been forged as a result of travel social work, whether it's meeting my colleagues there at the facility or meeting other travelers who are also there at the hospital too. And so when I first got started, the travel social work world was fairly new. And so a lot of us knew each other. So we'd see each other for different contracts and
Oh,
kind of meet up
nice.
in between contracts as well. And so now that it's becoming more popular, there is less of that kind of familial link, but there still are a lot of hospitals hire multiple travelers at once. And so talking to other travelers who are there, but also connecting with other travel nurses who are usually always sometimes there as well, can be really helpful in just kind of building up that social sense of community, especially as you move to different places every 13 weeks. So that gives you a
Mhm.
kind of a chance to, I think of it as like a new start every 13 weeks. All right, new chapter, new place, new people, and you just
I
get a
love
chance to
that.
start from the ground up and really make some of those organic connections, especially when it comes to work environment and really exploring the area that you're in.
That's so cool. Yeah. Do you find you're kind of coming back to the same cities? Like I know you mentioned Houston and the DMV area and all that stuff. Do you find you kind of like circle around to the same cities, or does it seem like it's just new places all the time? Just
So
curious.
starting out, I was really about new places. So I
Yeah.
like went to several different contracts in California. Then I wanted to take something on the East Coast. So I worked in Georgia, but also in DC. And so it really is a matter of preference. Personally, I find that I always want a new adventure. So I'm really happy to bounce around and find something new and go somewhere I haven't gone before. Recently, there's been a lot of new positions open in some areas like Hawaii or Alaska. And so a lot of travel social workers use that as an opportunity to like see a different area, but also explore a different state or somewhere they may not have gone otherwise in their career, where they get a chance to, on the weekends, really explore the area and get a whole different experience than they would in some of the lower 48 states.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I keep thinking I'm going to wrap up, but then I think of another question. I just curious, you know how you always hear like working in hospitals, you get like these like 36-hour shifts where you go in and do like 3 12s and then you have 4 off. Do you find that's the kind of schedule you get, or can you pick your schedule, or is it like nights usually? I'm just curious if there's like a typical shift that the contractor gets versus like a regular employee,
Yeah. Well, because it's healthcare, there isn't necessarily sometimes the 9 to 5 structured workday that we always like to think of. In my experience, I've worked primarily 9 to 5, but there have been times where I've worked 10-hour shifts or when I worked 12-hour shifts, depending on how scheduling is set up at the facility and also depending on the staffing need. Because social workers are there to meet a staffing need many times on the holidays, the late nights, the weekends. Those are the time slots that they book travelers for, because travelers are there specifically to meet that staffing need. So it is very easy to get pulled into like holiday work, weekend work.
I bet.
Because you're there to fill a staffing need, and because healthcare is staffed 24/7, especially in hospitals.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Yeah. I was just thinking like I'd never be able to do like an overnight contract or something, like that would be tough, I think, but everybody's different. Some people love that.
Absolutely. And the great thing is that they tell your schedule ahead of time, so you can decide if it's something that works for you, whether you're working days, nights, weekends, holidays. You can set that expectation and find out what the facility is looking for and then decide if it's a good fit for you.
Nice. Wow. This is so interesting. Thank you so much for just sharing all these details. I think, if anybody's listening, go grab that book. It's probably just so helpful to do this. This is something I never even thought of, like an aspect I never even really thought of pursuing, as a traveling therapist. So I just love that you shared all these insights. Really do. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. So everybody go check out Alisha Powell. What was your Facebook group again?
So the group is Social Work Travelers. I also have a Facebook group called Remote Positions for Mental Health Clinicians, where I just post remote positions from places all over the country. So if listeners are interested in just working remotely or looking to see what's available remotely, I do post positions pretty frequently for people that are just kind of looking to kind of get unplugged and have a bit more flexibility with their time. So social work travelers and remote positions for mental health clinicians.
That is so cool. Are all the remote positions like United States based, or are there like other countries and
so I share primarily United States based positions, but I do share on occasion international positions that I come across.
That's so cool. I just thought of 1,000 more questions to ask you, but I'm not going to. Y'all can figure it out. Probably if you go to the Facebook groups, I'm sure you'll get all these questions answered. But gosh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much for having me and for the invitation.
Thank you so much for listening to the Traveling Therapist podcast. For show notes, links, and downloads, head over to thetravelingtherapist.com, where you'll be able to learn more about my journey, the courses I've created for you, and other exciting resources to make your dreams become a reality. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with your traveling therapist friends, subscribe to the podcast, and if you loved this episode, please leave a review.